Hi everyone. I actually have not met all of you. My name is Natalie Ledbetter. I'm head of people and platform at BoldStart. I'm excited for all of you to join today. We have another BoldStart speaker series, which is generally an internal thought leadership presentation. And we'll be hosting these weekly going forward. So if you have a topic you'd like to hear a thought leader speak about, or even if you have a thought leader who you'd like to hear from, please email Ellen or I, and we can get them on the schedule. So today we are hosting Jay Sivachelvan, who is currently Fortress IQ's VP of Global Partnerships. And Jay's going to talk to us about starting and scaling a partnership ecosystem. One just quick note, we want this to be interactive. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions along the way, or you can just put your questions into the chat and I'll get Jay to answer those as we go. So Jay, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and we will go from there.
All right. Thank you, Natalie, for having me on. Hey, everyone, it's good to meet you. I'm Jay, VP Global Partnerships at Fortress IQ. Just a quick intro. So I actually started my career in investment banking and then moved into private equity. The entire time I was really focused on working exclusively with software companies. And then after grad school, ever since grad school, I've been working exclusively with software companies. And prior to Fortress IQ, I was at a company called Anaplan. I got brought on by the co-founder there to build out what was really his moonshot around a specific set of strategic partnerships with the management consulting firms. So at the time, no software companies had really managed to work with the management consulting firms. And it wasn't for lack of trying, it was because these firms were just very reticent to work with software companies. And so that's really what I was tasked to do. Over the course of the next 3.5 years, I built that business from scratch to roughly 25 million ARR as part of Anaplan's growth from a private company to a public company and a $7 billion public company that it is today. Since then, I actually joined Fortress IQ a year and a half ago. I wanted to build something again from the ground up and do it at an early stage company. And that's what I've been doing here at Fortress IQ. Since I joined, really to build a partnership program from scratch. We've grown it from nothing to what was in the most recent quarter, about 85% of all net new revenue was coming from partners. And so really today, I wanted to hopefully provide some insight into how you can really start and scale a partnership program. We'll talk about why partnerships is incredibly bespoke and very company specific, but I'm hoping that some of the insights that I share will be actionable for you guys, right? And we have a small enough group where you can, like Natalie said, just hop off of mute, ask me questions. I'll also pause at the end of each slide to see if there are any questions. So what are we covering today? Why should you partner, right? What is the reason for partnering? When should you partner? How should you go about hiring? Not just your first partnerships hire, but whoever that person is, how might they want to build out their team? Some basic partner segmentation and strategy for enterprise B2B software companies. Again, some could be extrapolated to other industries if for whatever reason you're not in enterprise B2B software. And then keys to success and pitfalls to avoid, and obviously a healthy dose of Q&A. So I wanted to start off by just highlighting that if you think about sales and marketing, right, the playbook and those roles are known, right? It's known when you should probably bring those leaders on board. And sales and marketing for enterprise B2B software, while still going to be bespoke for specific companies, there's sort of a playbook that is reasonably well known. But with partnerships, the playbook and role is completely ambiguous, right? Do you need partnerships? You know, when should you hire for partnerships? And what does partnerships even mean for your business, right? There's not just a lot of nomenclature out there for this function, alliances, partnerships, BD, but there's also a lot of different expectations. A lot of it boils down to, you know, again, what the founder, CEO, executive team really wants from this function. And also, again, what the timing for when it would potentially even make sense, right? All of these things, all these variables are so varied that the playbook ends up being not really a playbook at all, right? And it's very ambiguous. So at any rate, like I said in the beginning, I'm hoping to still provide some insights that I think that you guys will be able to use. So, to start, why should you partner in the first place? And I think it really boils down to two reasons, right? One is accelerating sales velocity and efficiency for your business. And then secondly, creating competitive and strategic value for your business. So, in that first bucket, how do you measure that? How do you really look at that, right? And there's a few things. One is partner sourced business. And this is basically the notion of what is the business that partners are bringing to you that you otherwise would not have had, right? The second metric is partner impacted business. And that is simply the partner sourced business plus partner influenced business. Partner influenced business is opportunities that you might have already had through your sales and marketing engine, but those opportunities where you're bringing in a partner because they have influence in the account, because they have subject matter expertise, whatever it might be, but you're bringing them in to effectively help accelerate your sales cycle. Here it is. Accelerate your sales cycle, increase your deal size, and also increase your win rates, right? With this partner deal profile that just popped up here, which again is something that you can measure, right? So you can look at the partner deals that you have, see were they closing, were the sales cycles quicker, were they bigger, were the win rates higher, right? But at any rate, these are kind of the metrics that you look at when you're measuring the ability of partnerships to accelerate the sales velocity and efficiency for your business. But there's also sort of this other, subjective element, which is also just as critical, right? It's the idea of meeting customers where they want to be met. So, one example is at Anaplan, our customers, right? They wanted to buy transformation from McKinsey. They didn't want to buy transformation from McKinsey and then go to Anaplan and buy the software and have a full-blown software sales cycle in the middle of their transformation program with McKinsey, right? And McKinsey didn't want that either. We had a very customer-centric mentality at Anaplan, which a lot of leading companies do, right? We always said customer first. And so meeting customers where they want to be met was critical to being customer first. And so what we did was while our preference may have been to own the sales cycle, own the customer relationship, do things our way, we went out of our way to meet the customer where they wanted to be met by putting in place sort of a commercial structure that met the way McKinsey wanted to do business, and also made it as seamless as possible for the end customer to do business, right? So that's, again, this whole idea of keeping in mind meeting customers where they want to be met. On competitive advantage and strategic value, I think this is incredibly important, right? Controlling and amplifying the market message. If you are creating a market, if you're creating a category, you can scream from, the rooftops about why you should create this category, your place in it, and all these things, but it'll never be as impactful as having reputable third parties echoing that same message, right? I always tell, our sales guys at the deal level, you can always say that you're the best thing since sliced bread, but it's going to be much, much more powerful when Deloitte says you're the best thing since sliced bread, right? So similarly, if at Anaplan, we were creating connected planning as a category, no one had ever heard of it. And we could have been like the long, line of graves of people who tried to create a category and failed because there was only one saying it, but we got and mobilized our partnership ecosystem behind this message. And now it is a category. There's connected planning practices within large system integrator firms. It's a category that analysts speak about. So at any rate, partners are important if you intend to create a category or, create a market, and not just create a category, but cement your position in it, right? At the deal level, it's about using partners to build a moat around your deals. So again, you want in your deal to have everyone that has influence saying, hey, you should be working with Fortress IQ. And the only person that's saying you should work with a competitor is a competitor, right? So it's mobilizing your partners at the deal level right? Just like you did at the market level to drive better outcomes. Creating unique solutions, right? This is basically the idea of taking your software, packaging it up with a partner's subject matter expertise, on the services side, or another partner's technology to create something differentiated, right? Again, at Anaplan, one of the things that we did was we powered a zero-based budgeting application with our technology to create a technology-enabled solution to a problem that was previously solved with Excel, and technology there was the limiting factor. At Fortress IQ, we've paired our technology with process mining, and you don't really need to know the space all that well. The main point there is just that we created the first offering that combines process mining and process discovery in the market with our technology partner Signavio. So this ability to create unique solutions is part of this competitive advantage bit. And then lastly, strategic partnerships that help increase company value. This is basically the idea that you are adding so much value to your partners that the value of your company increases as a result. A few examples of this. The most obvious example is you see some company get acquired for a multiple that makes 0 sense to you. Well, they weren't acquired for the multiple, they were acquired for the strategic value they brought to that business. And in most cases, big companies try before they buy. They partner before they buy. They don't just buy out of the blue. So again, it doesn't mean that you're optimizing for an M&A exit. All it means is that there's a lot of value to be added to your business if you can add a ton of value to your partners, right? And the value, by adding that much value to your partners, it inherently increases the value of your business.
Jay, could I ask a question that I think might be relevant to some of the folks on the call? So, in the create unique solutions bullet point, I think one of the interesting things is there's like you said, meeting the customer where they want to be met. So McKinsey's like, hey, listen, we need you to go and do this or build out this solution or whatever. There's resources from a technical side that you're going to have to invest behind that partnership, right, to make that happen. So how do you kind of evaluate the not only the resources that you're putting on from the go-to-market side, right, but also the resources that you may have to put on from a technical perspective to partner, and how do you kind of manage that? Like, I know that's something that you do, is kind of tighten the scope on that and saying, hey, this is what we will do and this is what we won't do. So how do you kind of make those trade-offs and draw those lines on what you'll do?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an important point that we'll talk about later in some depth, which is partner infrastructure. There oftentimes is a lot of focus on the partnership function to drive top of funnel, but there's not as much effort on, once you have the opportunity and the partners are supporting you, how do you effectively service that opportunity through to completion and also post sale. Just like, in the early stages, just like your customers will push you around a bit, they'll be challenging, they'll be demanding, they'll want maybe bespoke product features, and you have to kind of go through and figure out what makes sense for your business, what scales and what doesn't scale. It's gonna be the same thing on the partner side, right? The North Star is the first win. By getting your first win, you are leaps and bounds above every other partner that's trying to work with Deloitte. And by the way, it's every single enterprise software company out there. So having that maniacal focus on the first one is important. And as part of that means that you might be doing some certain things that are that don't scale, right, to get that first win. But unlike on the product side, where you have to maybe take on a lot of technical debt to build a product feature to do something, with a partner, generally it's just elbow grease, right? You might have to put on an extra person from customer success to give them kind of the white glove service. You might have to go above and beyond, maybe on a pricing discount. You might have to give them the warm and fuzzies, right? Whatever it takes to have them feel that working with you is low risk, high value. Those are the things that you solve for. So again, I draw the parallel back to your working with your first customers and how you're going to do things that you might not necessarily do as you go further down. But as you do go further down the journey, and partners are wanting to work with you, it can be more selective. That's where, Sean, your point's important, where you really want to tighten up scope, hold a tight line on certain things, make sure you're not setting a bad precedent, which then will obviously potentially have to be applied to many, many partners. But that's kind of how I think about it.
Cool. Thanks.
So, what does success look like at scale, right, across these two businesses? And actually, even before I do that, what I will say is, partnerships typically get measured by this first bucket, right? But the second bucket, create competitive advantage, this is what really has the potential to change the trajectory of your business. And bucket number one and bucket number two combined is why there are no big winners, as far as I'm aware of, in enterprise B2B software that did not invest and successfully scale a partnership program, right? Again, there might be exceptions, but I'm not aware of any. So what does success look like at scale? 20 to 35% of your net new business is sourced by partners. 60 to 75% of your net new business is impacted by partners. And again, impacted is the summation of sourced and influenced. And this is based on looking at companies like Anaplan, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Shopify. But it is a long journey, right? It's a very, very long journey. You have to be willing to play the long game with partnerships. If you look at Shopify, in 2018, they had 18% of their net new business was sourced by partners. 2 years later, they got to 20%, right? Which is, again, best in class. But that was 15 years after they were founded, right? They're 150 billion or whatever it is, public company. So that's not to say that you won't have success for 10 to 15 years. It's just success at scale where it is, it has created this machine, this monster that is going to cement this company's legacy and create insurmountable competitive advantage that, utopia, that will take a long time, but you certainly will be able to see success, well before that. Any questions? Sorry, go ahead.
This is not Peter, this is Aisha. I don't know why I am being like labeled like this, but Peter shared the invite with me. That's probably why. This is Aisha from Slim.ai, a bold start company. As I was looking at the stats that you have that was identifying what success looks like. So you mentioned that we need to be focusing on the long term and not maybe the immediate results. But is there a possibility of scrutinizing partnerships with these statistics a little early on, where you're not focusing on the art of the relationship, that collaborative alliance, and make it a fleeting encounter because you're too metric specific, especially in the beginning with a partner?
Yeah, so let me read that question back out to you. So basically, partnerships is a long game, right? But how do you measure partnerships over the near and medium term to make sure that you're on the right track? Is that the question? Or
without killing the partnership too early in the process by focusing on specific numbers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great question. So this is a big misconception, right? There's the one thing there's never any shortage of, by the way, is BD guys. There's like a million BD guys, and a lot of people have been doing it forever. I actually am not a lifelong BD guy, and I whenever I hire, I actually don't want lifelong BD guys. But one misconception that I feel like BD people have sort of potentially perpetuated is this notion that just because it's a long-term play, that means it's not measurable in the near term or the medium term, which I don't think is true. So the way that I think you do it, right? I'll give you one example. At Fortress IQ, before I joined, the commitment I made to the board, which includes Volstart, was that after 1 year, I would have 25% of net new business be partner impacted, right? That was kind of a commitment that I made. There's leading indicators of that, like pipeline. In enterprise software, assume a 6-month sales cycle. So you can look to pipeline to see if you're on the right track, theoretically 6 months out, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about the details specifically, but I think what it boils down to is having a very tight plan that's agreed to before the person comes on board, and then taking that plan and not just using it as a vetting mechanism on whether or not you hire that person, but taking that plan and baking it into that person's quarterly goals and compensation plan, right? Again, that plan is going to be based on the leading indicators of success, and you should be measuring that on a quarterly basis. We'll talk about this. Actually, it's a good topic. So we're going to talk about this in a couple of slides as well in more detail. So Let me know if, did I answer your question for now though?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So, now you know kind of hopefully, why you should be partnering, when should you partner? And ideally it's when you have this trifecta of, product market fit, repeatable sales motion, and product partner fit. I'll talk about what that means. One thing I'll mention on product market fit, partners aren't going to create product market fit for you. They're going to enable you to capitalize on it, right? Similarly, partners aren't going to create a repeatable sales motion for you, but they'll enable you to scale it. And then product partner fit, in its most basic fundamental terms, means to what degree does your platform and strategy allow for the ability for partners to make money, right? To what degree can partners make money on your stuff? And this is where it ends up being bespoke. The types of partners that you're going through. There's probably certain types of services partners, certain types of technology partners. Maybe there's other categories. But at the end of the day, it boils down to how well can you make your partners money? And so if I look at, if we look at what is, product partner fit, this is kind of a simple paradigm that I use. On the services side is, does your platform need a healthy amount of services to maximize product value? And I'm not just talking about implementation services, which is kind of screwing in the software. It's also advisory services, managed services, training services. The more services, the better, right? That's a strong product partner fit. A weaker product partner fit is if your platform is self-service or aims to be self-service. On the technology side, right? It's if your product or your platform has a very high ability to fill gaps and extend value and fit in with big tech companies and ISVs, that's strong product partner fit. If you're looking to be the end-to-end platform that's a one-stop shop that kind of does it all, that's not great product partner fit. All that said, you can have a phenomenal business with a very weak product partner fit, right? This is simply stating, what ingredients will put you in the best position for success if you choose to invest in a partner program. If you look at this and say, listen, we're self-service, we're kind of being the end-to-end platform, that's actually great. It's actually a phenomenal SMB business, right? If you're targeting SMBs, that just means that instead of putting dollars in partnerships, at least now, you should put it in, your sales and marketing engine instead. I think Salesforce, classic textbook example of this. They actually commissioned a study by IDC to just show how much value, how much money they make their partners, which is interesting. Right now, they're generating $5 in revenue for their partners for every $1 they generate in Salesforce. I think it's a great example of them having as one of their key pillars, their mantras. How do we make our partners rich? Right. That's something that they've done very well. So before I go on to hiring, any questions?
Jay, not necessarily a question, but I'm sorry, Aaron Friedman over at Wallaroo. One comment, can you go back to your last slide?
Sure.
I think one thing that you might want to also just kind of call out is you need to understand your partner's business and see how it aligns to making the money. It's probably under product fit, but one thing as far as a tripping point that I've run into in my experience is that not understanding whether the company is an SI or VAR and how that your product actually makes the money causes that delayed, return on investment on whether or not to partner.
Absolutely. That's, one of the before, and we'll talk about this kind of like what to look for in your hire, but one of the things you absolutely need to do is figure out, who, for partnerships, who would your partners be, right? And then how would each of those individuals make money, right? It's not as simple as services, as you pointed out, in technology. It's, SIs, GSIs versus regionals versus resellers and managed service providers, all these things. Like, how do they make money? It's not, so many companies make the mistake of thinking that because they have a cool product and a differentiated technology, that's going to be enough to drive interest and backing from partners, right? The reality is that hundreds, maybe thousands of startups just like you are going after Deloitte or going after Microsoft or going after all these same companies. And you really need to have not just a compelling, but a simple and clear and easily understood messaging around how these partners are going to make money on your stuff, right? And you have to be, also a little bit detailed, because you don't want to put the onus on the partner to try and figure out how they make money on your stuff. You want to be very prescriptive and say, listen, here's specifically how you make money. And it's a journey. Over time, you can help them create service offerings or create joint offerings if it's a technology partner, but that's very important. I think the other thing that, that comment reminded me of is, you don't need, by the way, all three of these things to justify investing in a partnership program. At Fortress IQ, we did not, and are still working through our sales motion, right? We did not have a repeatable sales motion when I came on board. We continued to refine it, but I simply just tailored the partnership program to that reality, right? And what that means is, instead of having what I will call true channel, which is partners owning the end-to-end sales cycle, resellers, as an example, I tailored the program where they still have avenues to make money, on the services and co-selling, but they were driving top of funnel, and our sales team would execute those sales cycles, right? Versus a true reseller who owns the end-to-end sales cycle. And no one knows your sales cycle as well as you do. So until yours is completely buttoned up, you're not going to be able to effectively train a reseller to do that for you, right? So that's why I just morphed it to that reality. So again, you don't need all three of these things. In a perfect world, you do. There's also a lot of benefit to investing early. So it's kind of like, if you have two of these things, right, or the ingredients, you can kind of make a call on it. But I just wanted to make that point as well. So thanks for the questions, by the way. Keep them coming. Feel free to come off of mute and even interrupt me if there's something that's kind of on the tip of your tongue. So on hiring, when do I typically see, a partnerships leader come on board? Typically it's late Series A, which is what I was at Fortress IQ, to early Series C, which is when Anaplan decided to hire. But even outside of those two anecdotes that I know, this is typically, I think, where I think it's the right time to bring someone on, again, provided that, it makes sense for your business to embark on this journey. Org-wise, I've seen this done so many different ways. I suggest that for early stage, you have a VP reporting to the founder and CEO. There's 2 or 3 reasons for that. One is you could bring in a more junior person, but what's important is kind of setting that overall strategic direction and strategy, given how ambiguous and bespoke partnerships is, making sure you're directing the resources to the right areas. The other thing is, I often see partnerships roll up into sales, right? And eventually we'll talk about that, but that certainly will happen most likely eventually. But the issue with that is at the outset, there's a timing mismatch of the long game that's associated with partnerships and the short game that's associated with sales. And that can create conflict that would prevent you from being able to get your partnerships effort even off the ground, right? So those are a couple things to consider. As companies scale, right? At Anaplan, what we did is, as we scaled and we got repeatability, we actually bifurcated the partnership program. We put technology partnerships under product, because technology partnerships will always have a longer incubation period, right? There's an integration that's potentially associated with it. There's just a long tail to set those up before they're successful. So that reported into product, and then a lot of the services partnerships that were at scale reported up through, our CRO. So there's different ways to do it, but at the outset, early on, I think it's great to have, someone who can set the strategic direction of the function, have that person report to the founder and CEO, and just kind of really build it from there. What should you look for? In many cases, it's kind of what I look for across the board, like IQ, EQ, hustle. That's kind of my fundamental hiring, philosophy for any role, but obviously something you should look for in your VP partnerships. Someone who has a proven ability to do and manage. This is important, right? At an early stage company, you don't want just a manager, frankly. And someone that you might be tempted to move on, who had a massive amount of success at this other company that's bigger than you guys in a space that's relevant. That's certainly tempting, but they might have gotten comfortable in their life managing their team and versus actually, doing. and a plan, I was mindful of this, right? So even though I built out a team to run the global management consulting business, I still ran the US business myself, even though I'd hired someone to run EMEA for me and hired someone to run APAC for me. It was important that I did and managed. And so you can kind of, we'll talk about profiles to look for, but you want someone, and you want to make sure you can vet someone who can both do and is comfortable doing and manage. Because just because they're good at doing doesn't mean they're a good manager. Just because they're a good manager doesn't mean they're good at doing, and you kind of need both at the early stage. So third, someone that's on the upward career arc. Again, these are all from personal preferences, but I'm sure different people have different hiring mentalities and methodologies. So whatever you would look for other members of your executive team, you can apply that here. I generally favor people who are on kind of their upward career arc and has shown kind of career progression. They're hungry. This last piece is important actually for this role. Alignment on a VSEM, vision, strategy, execution, and metrics, and timelines. So given the ambiguity of partnerships, I think it's important that whoever you before you move forward with someone, you have them present a VSCM to you. Again, the vision, the strategy, the execution plan, and the metrics with the associated timelines. Present that to you. Make sure you're both aligned on that before you pull the trigger. The temptation is to move fast on good talent. Good talent's hard to find, but this is a step that you might not want to skimp on. Just make sure you're aligned there. And then you can flow that VSEM plan into kind of the overall comp plan and quarterly plan. I think this will help make sure that you're on the same page and prevent misaligned expectations down the road.
Hey Jay, this is Jillian from Slim. What are your favorite EQ tools during the recruitment process so that you can qualify someone's capacity for that emotional quotient?
Yeah, and the EQ part, frankly, is hard to bring a quantitative or a kind of a test-based approach to it. I kind of get a sense of it through their references, and oftentimes I'll talk to a partner that they managed to get a sense of, what that working relationship was like. One of the truths that applies not just to partnerships, but to everywhere is you like doing business with people that you like, right? So doing reference checks with people that these people were doing business with is a good way to kind of vet it. But that's kind of the extent of it. Nothing super scientific, quite frankly. I kind of make sure that the interview panel that's I have set up tends to feel like they would enjoy working with this person, and that the partners that they worked with in prior roles enjoyed working with them. Not just enjoyed working with them, but obviously had a successful business relationship. But that's typically what I do.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So things you should look out for, if this person puts a headcount plan in front of you requiring several immediate hires, or kind of looks like they're like, oh, well, if this person's doing this and this person's doing that, then what are you doing? Kind of optics look like a pure manager. Those are things to look out for, because typically what you want the VP to do is to get a general direction, figure stuff out, right? And then once you have direction on where you want to go, then hire accordingly. But you don't want to have someone who's just going to try and solve the problem with purely headcount. And then a plan that shows success at scale in less than 18 months. Again, shows success in less than 18 months? Yes. Shows success at scale in less than 18 months? Maybe it ends up happening, but it's not often. So again, if it's helpful, the plan that I put in front of our board was 25% of partner impacted business a little over a year in. That's obviously not an at scale success metric, but it's a great ambitious target for year one. We obviously did get to meaningfully north of that, but that's not the expectation that I set. And I would have been wary if I was our CEO if I had put that expectation out of the gate. So just again, if it sounds too good to be true, the old if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So what should your VP look for? This is going to be up to them, but if it's helpful for you guys, what I look for is just really hungry generalists with raw talent versus specialists like the lifelong BD guys, right? Once Anaplan, for example, once we built out these relationships, they were doing really well. I actually hired someone from Bain. I hired someone from McKinsey. I had a specific profile I was looking for. I wanted them to be a Bain and McKinsey alum, but not come to us directly from Bain and McKinsey. I want them to go have had one stop in between. So you can figure out, the more tailored approach based on the partners and the scope that they'll be managing once you have more direction. But at this moment, you probably don't know what partnerships even means to you, where you're going to place your bets. You're still kind of in that discovery phase. So you just need really creative, hungry people who have good talent, right? People who might be in a junior role at a larger company that's in your space. I like those people because they self-select out. If they're comfortable with their cushy gig and they don't like risk, they're not going to come to you anyway. But if they do, then they'll self-select kind of into the process, and they'll bring a lot of special things. I also like the cerebral AE as a role. I like a pre-sales guy. I hired a former pre-sales guy for one of the headcount at Fortress IQ, who's been great. And then generally hiring your blind spots, right? The things that, because you're going to be doing and managing, hiring for the people who are good at the stuff that you won't be doing, right? So let me pause there and see if there's any questions before I move on.
Hey, Jay, I have a question. Actually, it's two parts. So what are some of the things to look for? What are, I guess, some of the signs to look for in terms of figuring out if you did hire the wrong person? And then I guess as the second part, how do you tell that you're on the wrong path in terms of partnerships, just because it's, partnerships have a much longer term nature to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best way to keep yourself and the person you hire honest and continue monitoring whether or not they are the right fit is basically this VSEM, which you guys, the vision, the strategy, the execution, the metrics. That's basically the whole approach for partnerships. If you codify that into a quarterly plan, it forces you to look at progress on a quarterly basis versus in many cases it's kind of like, after the quarter, let's review it. The partnerships person might be able to talk a good game. They might be able to talk about things like, oh, there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of conversations. Those are red flags typically, by the way. You want to be able to point to something. I still go back to the fact that you can always, the one thing that won't lie is pipeline. So you can always look to pipeline to make sure this person's kind of on the right track because that pipeline might not close for another 6 months. So it's really, where are partners, the things you kind of want to look at, in addition to the VSEM that you codify into quarterly goals, are things like what opportunities or accounts are partners advocating for us at? Where are they collaborating with us, right? At the account level, which is kind of the leading indicator for putting their money where their mouth is. That's going to be, the king metric that I would look at, along with whatever else you have for VSEM, right? For example, one of the things that Fortress IQ that I thought was important was feeding partners through our marketing engine to be a megaphone to highlight, our point of view on the market and the space. And so metrics around partner marketing initiatives with like reputable service companies, those could be kind of like MBO things that you look at. But I think the best way to look at it is, so the way I look at it for the guy on my team right now, Fortress IQ, is I look at the pipeline additions in the beginning. How many new opportunities were being added to the pipeline, either because a partner sourced them or because they're collaborating with us on existing opportunities. If it's 6 months, right, and you don't have any, accounts that you can point to or partners are working with us on, that's a red flag, right? That's, you should be able to see that in 6 months. So I think the combination of putting quarterly rigor around specific metrics, specifically influence and sourced, and other metrics that you think are important to the overall business as part of this VSEM, codifying that into quarterly goals, and then looking out for red flags where the highlights at the end of each quarter are, oh, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of conversations, right? And less of, hey, these partners are helping us at these accounts. We are actually going down the path with this technology partner on an integration. And here is sort of the go-to-market plan that we have that we're working on in parallel while the integration is being built. Tangible things like that are certainly red flags to look for.
Jay, this is Michael. I'm with Replicated, which is a Bold Start company, but we are actually we're an interesting space. We're a pure, B2B technology provider in that we only right now in our current motion, we only sell to ISVs. So we're a platform that enables, folks like Circle CI, HashiCorp, Puppet, Harness to deliver self-hosted, on-premise versions of their applications. And so I'm going to be taking over an alliances role, and really our focus right now is trying to establish, go-to-market and really technology alliances with folks like Rancher, Red Hat, VMware, Cisco as well, potentially. And so my question is around the measurement. When you look at that goal that you put out there, 25% partner impacted, obviously for technology partners, it's not as easy to wrap that kind of metric around, those activities. And initially our focus is much more on technology partnerships than on, go-to-market, selling and end user selling partnerships. But what we are looking at is, there are ISVs that we work with that are customers that are interested in working with those larger technology partners. And so I'm wondering if for our business, if it would be fair to just move the measurement level up a layer, if you will, to focus on how many of, say, our ISVs are engaging with these various technology partners through us, or are we, how many of those are we jointly engaged with? Because it's going to be difficult in this particular area to really put a partner impacted or partner sourced kind of revenue number as a metric.
Yeah, absolutely. This, I think, highlights the overall point, which is partnerships are very bespoke. And so, whenever, as I highlight anecdotes throughout this presentation, I am 100% certain that for many of you guys and others, it just won't be applicable for many, many reasons. For technology partnerships in broad strokes, it actually is a different animal, right? And that's why at companies at scale, like at Anaplan, we bifurcated technology and services partners. And I think it's very simple, but the best framework to kind of use for this is not kind of necessarily a bottoms up, what does this look like? What should success look like from a partnership perspective, but more from working backwards from, all right, for your specific business, obviously there's an objective in mind that you guys will have for putting in place these specific types of partnerships, right? There's a reason that you're going down this path of partnering with other technology companies. So really putting pen to paper on, well, what does success look like? What do we want? What is the reason that we're doing this? We're doing this with success in mind. So what does that success look like? And then taking a step back from that and say, all right, well, what would the leading indicators be of that success? So what are the things and the milestones that we need to actually do that would be critical in order to reach this end game of success? And then measuring that, I think. And so on the sales side, right, let's just say in super simplistic terms, obviously partnerships goes well above and beyond this, but for a partnership with, PwC where it's humming and, it's all about revenue. Well, the success looks like a ton of revenue, X amount of revenue. Well, what's the best leading indicator of revenue? What are the best milestones? It's pipeline, right? So you can work backwards from that. Even though technology partnerships take a long time, they're a little bit more ambiguous. I still think you can go through that same exercise because there's a reason that you're going down that path to say, what do we want success to look like? Put pen to paper there, and then work backwards and just really get granular on what are the milestones that would be critical to reach in order to reach that end game of success, and then start measuring those things.
Hey, Michael, this is Aaron over at Wallaroo, and we just became a client of yours.
Yeah, I heard you introduce yourself, Aaron. I noticed that. So welcome to the family.
Thank you, sir. For your particular, like I had the joy of managing the relationship between Qubel and Google. For your particular product, I wouldn't dismiss the cloud products because they are actually partnering with a lot of startups and are looking for technologies like yours in order to help them be able to wrap and deploy.
Absolutely. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Aaron, because I didn't kind of want to rat them all off. But yeah, it's interesting because we've actually already spoken with Amazon because, you know, they open source EKS Anywhere as
Right.
EKP, right? And so we're already talking to them about possibly using that. So as you can imagine, Aaron, what we, you know, at a high level, our strategic goal is to exit the business of supporting bespoke Kubernetes clusters.
Right.
Right. And you as a software vendor, you would like to get out of that business as well with us, right? And so the more Kubernetes ubiquity I can create and create a value prop for the distributors of those major Kubernetes platforms, that we are feeding them, you know, basically node counts for ELAs, right?
But in that same sense, I'm sorry, this is way off topic, folks, and we'll get off this and maybe take it offline. You've got companies like Google who's come out with was it Autolite or Autoscale, which is
yep.
Yeah, which also would then be a forefront runner for what you're doing in order to able like internal development to be deployed quicker.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Aaron, because we hadn't really thought about the cloud providers themselves directly, but that's actually great feedback.
Let me know if you actually need an introduction over there, because the guy who managed us also manages like Databricks and everybody else.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Let's take that offline. But I love that Bold Start companies partnering and working together as customers. So that's amazing. One question, Jay, that I have for you actually is, and I think you may get to this in a little bit later, but we have, I think, out of the companies that are kind of in the room right now, there's a bunch of different partnerships. There's some that are kind of, doing the traditional sort of McKinsey, BCG, I forget what the terminology is, but, those sort of folks. Then there's like the SIs, there's the ISVs, there's like kind of all these different approaches. I know you mentioned kind of, hey, tech partnerships would be kind of almost a different way or a different approach than, the kind of more channel partners on the go-to-market side. But even within the channel partners, you could still have these different segmentations, right? And so how do you think about the approach for each of those and what that looks like from a rev share or whatever way that somebody should be thinking about interacting with those different segments?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a good Sean was sneaking ahead. Maybe I don't know if you had access to my presentation, but that's actually a great segue for this next slide. Really, this is kind of where I talk a bit more about the segmentation and strategy, right? These are the broad-based partner types. I'll talk about, showing to your question around kind of this last column, the commercial models and the commercial structures. What does that look like? And then, as you pointed out, even within these broad-based partner types, there's further segmentation. There's segmentation. Again, my approach here is I'm trying to talk in as broad strokes as possible as it relates to general truths, as it relates to enterprise B2B partnerships. So, and some of this might be known to you guys, but the big buckets really are global SI and consulting firms. This is where the management consulting firms, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, the big four accounting firms, KPMG, PwC, EY, et cetera. Accenture falls in here. The BPO firms like Cognizant, Wipro, Infosys. These are all subcategories that each require their own bespoke go-to-market and approach. But there's certain characteristics that generally hold true across these. At the very high level, right? The global SI firms, the big guys, they're very risk averse. They're incredibly challenging for early stage companies to pursue because, one, outside the fact that every single early stage company is pursuing them, in many ways they gravitate towards companies that they're already encountering organically in their own client work, right? So companies that already have that roster of Fortune 500 customers, that's an easier sort of sell. Whereas if you don't have the customer proof points to get mind share, it can be tough. But again, in many cases, you have to do this. that's just a nod to the fact that you really have to do this with the long game in mind. And while you're working on the big guys, right, working on with the small guys in parallel, and is going to be critical, because the small guys kind of pay the bills while you ramp up and get to that point with the big guys where you have those initial wins. And when I say the small guys, I mean regional. These partners are sometimes called boutiques, sometimes they're called RSIs, regional SIs. But ultimately, what they are is services firms that are specialized either at the regional level, the industry level, or the functional level, right? And why I love regional partners is because you can get really targeted with them, right? At Anaplan, we were able to target, those, functional partners focused on, for example, FP&A in the FSI industry, right? We could really pinpoint these RSI partners who were able to move very, very quickly. They're looking to differentiate themselves, so they're more open to new technologies. In many cases, they have outsized influence, albeit in a smaller universe of companies, but you can kind of replicate to a certain degree the impact that Deloitte might have with 6 or 7 smaller boutiques, right? That in aggregate have the same impact. So, everyone kind of falls in love with the big guys. In many cases, it's something that you have to do, but you also want to make sure that whoever you hire or you are focusing on kind of the regional players who can move the needle. Because again, they'll pay the bills in the near term while you sort of work to stand up the bigger guys. Fortress IQ, we just recently got our first win with Deloitte, right? Which is over a year in the making. But guess what? The partnership program was humming because we were paying the bills with the regional SI players who we invested in, the technology partnerships that we had, which we'll talk about. So it's just something to keep in mind on for the big guys in particular, but this is true across the board. The one thing that you really want to focus on is doing whatever it takes to get that first win. Once you have that first win, it puts you head and shoulders above anyone else, many other people who are pursuing these partnerships. And in pursuit of that first win, I recommend doing something that's probably counterintuitive, which is bringing these guys into your deals, right? Versus the expectation that they bring you into their deals. That'll happen over time, but you want to bring them into your deals because that accelerates the time to have that first proof point. Again, you're solving for that first proof point. You're building goodwill by bringing them into their deals. Once you have that proof point, word spreads like wildfire at these, big firms, even though they are big. Partners all talk to each other. So you want to get those first proof points. You want it to be a massive success, invest in whatever it takes to make that happen. And then it'll spread like wildfire. The other comment is similar to what I mentioned earlier around infrastructure. Optics are big for these guys because in many cases they look at optics and associate that with risk. So they see a partner program, or a partner portal that looks, it's like poorly set up or a poor UI. They'll attribute that with more risk and startups. So you kind of want to, punch above your weight a little bit. That's why we invested a lot in kind of the small details and the infrastructure, right? The partner program, completely professionally done, like with tiers and everything else. The partner enablement, formalized training and enablement programs that are self-serve, partner marketing initiatives, right? So a holistic partner program that's going to also help you with the optics of, well, one, not just help you attract the right partners when it comes to the RSIs, but also give you that level of professionalism that's come to be expected by the bigger guys. Just make sure that you don't have any blind spots and you're completely buttoned up. I think all those details in aggregate will, in combination with that first win, will again just help set you guys up for success. The commercial models, are the same options between the global firms and the regional firms. Regional firms typically prefer to resell, whereas global firms, again, there's always exceptions, right? And we actually have done I've done all 3 of these models with both buckets, but typically I found that global firms prefer to co-sell because they don't want to be seen as not being objective or in bed with the software companies. They want to be seen as sort of the trusted third-party advisor. They're serving their client. They're not serving the software partner. So they typically prefer to not take a direct commercial take and rather monetize the services. So they typically prefer a co-sell model, whereas a regional SI prefers a resell model. Managed service is more prevalent for global SIs than regional SIs because it requires that you sell to these firms. And global firms usually have more appetite, even though the sales cycle will be long, to go down that path. On the technology side, one thing I want to make abundantly clear, technology partnerships is not working, well, it can be, but the scope that I'm talking about here is not technology partnerships where you're partnering with technology firms to help fill a hole or a gap in your product. I'm talking about technology partnerships where you're doing that for someone else, right? So I think it's an exercise of getting a very good understanding of the market. Who are the winners or people who are doing exciting things, or the up and comers in your space, and figuring out what are those few bets that you're going to make and go very, very deep on. And again, it requires a very detailed understanding of the market, the direction, the product strategy, and at the end of the day, with the exercise of which companies am I going to be able to add the most value to, and which of those companies are doing really well. With almost no exception, and again, there's always exceptions, but I typically, at the early stage, there's not a lot of value in forging technology partnerships with companies that are your size or smaller, right? You want to be forging companies that have market reach and market potential. Of course, for integrations, which is, you're filling gaps in your product with third-party technology, right? That is a little bit of a different exercise. But anyway, I typically don't partner on the technology side. I don't partner with companies that are smaller than us, and typically focus on those that are up and coming. They're doing great things in the space. They're big companies. And again, all this requires a very detailed understanding of and a point of view on the current market and where it's going, the players that are in it, and then going deep on a few bets. The challenge, technology partnerships are incredibly challenging. Most of them fail. Technology co-selling is incredibly tough. And it's the simplest way to explain that is the fact that, think about your account executives, right? How hard would it be to convince those account executives to care about someone else's software? Well, that's basically what needs to happen for a technology co-selling partnership to work. So really pick a few bets and go deep on them, and pick ones where the value prop is incredibly simple, but also incredibly compelling. So at Fortress IQ, we have a phenomenal partnership with Microsoft, right? The way that and this goes back to adding outsized value, we found out that Microsoft was going to enter the RPA space. This happened now, I guess, a year and a half ago. And we bent over backwards to make sure that we were the process intelligence layer, not layer, but the process intelligence vehicle or mechanism or partner, whatever you want to call it, for their automation. So in its simplest terms, Fortress IQ takes the guesswork out of what to automate. Power Automate automates it. That's best in class end-to-end automation and helps Microsoft differentiate by entering a crowded market that consists of UiPath, Automation Anywhere, et cetera. So that's a bet we went incredibly deep on, right? Again, adding strategic value by being so valuable to that company, right? This is a great example. We then expanded our tentacles to be powered by Azure, drive more value across the Power Platform to include Power BI, Power Automate, all of this, all this activity around making ourselves as valuable as possible to a partner. And this, in our case, led to Microsoft actually leading our Series B round, right? But this whole notion around working with technology companies to make yourselves incredibly valuable to them, and knowing, especially at the early stage, you are only going to have technical bandwidth to maybe support 2 or whatever it might be, but 1 or 2, depending on how good your APIs is and integration infrastructure is, you're not going to be able to support a lot of these. So be very thoughtful about which ones you do go down the path on.
Hey, Jade, since we're about at time, I think we should just open it up to questions from the rest of the group. So please unmute and feel free to jump in here.
I've actually got to jump to another call, but this has been wonderful, Jay. Thank you very much. And thanks again to the Bold Start folks for hosting us. Aaron, I will reach out to you separately and let's connect to talk about your take on the partnerships with the cloud providers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. One quick question, I guess, that I have in order, I guess, to wrap this up. So how do you deal with channel conflict between sales and partners?
Yeah, so channel conflict is most prevalent when you actually are standing up resellers in true channel. To put it into perspective, at Anaplan, we actually never, ended up standing. I might have mentioned we never ended up standing up a true reseller program. But ultimately, the way to resolve it is to, at a high level, be generous. So you want to incent salespeople to work with partners, which means you don't want them competing on the same deal. So if a reseller sells a deal in an account, you want to compensate not just the reseller, but also the AE who owns that account. That facilitates collaboration. It's only on first year ACV. It's a small price to pay to build that partner-centric sales culture, and ultimately get as many hunting licenses, which is lands, as you possibly can. So I think the most basic and most effective way that I found is just to double compensate. So pay for any given deal, pay the reseller, but also pay your account executive.
Yeah, that's what we're already doing, Jay. Just remove the conflict.
Yep.
Yeah.
Facilitate cooperation. Hey, one question, Jay. What did you find sort of your spend was at Anaplan on partner enablement? Did you sort of have a metric of sort of percentage of revenue or ARR? How did you sort of measure how much you were investing in the enablement to sort of feed the machine incrementally over time?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question. We didn't, I'm sure that's our finance team, obviously at that point we had to go through a whole process to get enablement. I'm sure they had metrics to look at, but I think that the way that they were looking at it was, here's what we're spending on partnerships overall, and here's what we're getting in from partnerships as a unit. So adding 3 headcount, regardless of how they want to use it, justifies it. And of course, this is the benefit of having a phenomenal partnership program. It reaches a certain level of success that keeps feeding onto itself, that no matter how many headcount that you, not no matter how many, but you reach a certain point where you can add more headcount and the ROI will still look great, which of course at very late stage companies, then you risk having some additional fat, right, in the org. But at Anaplan, again, the way that our team looked at it was, or our CFO basically looked at it was holistically, here's how much I'm spending on partners, here's how much I'm getting in return. And we basically framed it as, listen, this engine only works if partners are enabled, right? It was actually a constant education exercise to show that if we drove all this stuff with partners and then it fell apart post-sale, that would be hugely damaging to the reputation and just completely kill any momentum with those partners. So in order to keep that going, we have to overinvest in making sure our partners are successful. And that folds into the customer first mentality.
Yeah, thanks.
We should probably go ahead and wrap. It looks like we've gone about 4 minutes over, but I wanted to ask for any final questions for Jay. Anyone? Okay. Great then. Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you to everybody who attended. We will be hopefully sending out Jay's slides after the presentation, and we'll definitely share a recorded copy of the video as well. So thank you all for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, both. Thank you, Jay.